Got it. Now. Hi, Jim.
Okay, welcome to the January 25th edition of Going Viral at goingviral.news. My name is Jim Dingeman. I'm joined in California with Ken Aaron, in New York City with Alex Stavropoulos, and in Morristown, New Jersey with Dennis Goldstein. Michael Jankowitz will come and join us later. We have with us tonight Ralph Seliger, who is the editor of A Third Narrative. Is that it, Ralph? You got to unmute, Ralph.
Yeah, sorry. The Third Narrative website.
Okay, and we will talk. Ralph will be joining us today as we deal with the issues of the day. Now, first, of course, we want to make sure that the headline, of course, is the issue of the Ukraine, and we're going to spend some time talking about that throughout the show. We have Michael Jankowitz joining us now from Queens. And, of course, the issue that's predominating the headlines in all the print and broadcast media is the question of what's happening with Ukraine. Biden said today that there will be enormous consequences for Russia if the Ukraine is invaded. Nancy Pelosi is running for Congress again, but she said that she's not sure whether she will remain Speaker of the House. And today, Biden is announced he was going to host a group of auto executives at the White House on Wednesday to advance his plans of increasing environmentally friendly electric vehicles. Now, we also have constantly going on in different localities around the country the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision on mask mandates. And today, a New York judge has granted a state ruling against the state's mask mandate, keeping it in place for now. In Michigan, a judge has declined to dismiss charges against 5 men who were accused of plotting to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer. And those are some of the stories going on today. National COVID deaths around the country are at their highest in the past year. There are a reported 2,100 plus deaths per day as of Monday. And this is up from 1,000 pre-Omicron death rates 2 months ago. So the United States saw the highest numbers of deaths in the pandemic about a year ago, before vaccines were widely available, and the daily average reached about 3,400. So the numbers, of course, are lower than they were, but it's not any sympathy or any kind of solace to take note of. I myself have a friend whose 88-year-old father died 2 weeks ago of Omicron. So it's affecting people all over the place, and it cannot be underestimated in terms of its impact. There was a visit of the Qatari Emirate to Washington today. Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, the ruler of the small Persian Gulf state of Qatar, came into the White House today, or yesterday rather, to talk with the United States about how to ensure energy supplies to Europe if the Ukraine is invaded by Russia. Now, to go further into this, and we'll spend a lot of time now talking about this, I wanted to share today what occurred on the NewsHour. The NewsHour had a piece today where they were talking about the whole question of what's going on in the Ukraine. This is their lead. And let me just make sure we have the right coordinates for it in terms of sound. This is the NewsHour tonight talking about the situation in the Ukraine.
Over Ukraine. As we reported, Ukraine's leaders are urging their citizens to remain calm, even as Russia poses a massive threat to the U.S. ally. Nick Schifrin has more on the view of Ukraine's government.
Thank you, Judy. We now turn to Oksana Markarova, Ukraine's ambassador to the United States. Ambassador, welcome to the NewsHour. Today we heard President Zelensky say that Ukrainians should not be panicked. But from comments by President Biden last week all the way to Prime Minister Johnson today, it is clear that the West thinks that an invasion could be imminent. Are you downplaying the threat in order not to cause panic, or do you see the threat differently?
Actually, we do see the threat exactly the same way our partners are seeing it. So Russia attacked us in 2014. We know what they are capable of. We know that they illegally already occupied Crimea and part of Donetsk and Lugansk territories. And we know that this 100,000 troops around our border is not there just to be there. So yes, Ukrainians are worried, but as our president said, we should not panic. We should get ready to defend our country. And this is what we are doing. So in addition to the military offensive that Russia is planning and portraying, they also are doing a lot to destabilize situation in the country. So all the cyber attacks, disinformation, information attack, they want us to panic. And we will not panic. We will get prepared. We will also do everything in order to continue to build our country, to reform our economy, and we are resolute to defend our country.
Do you believe, as the U.S. does, that an invasion could be imminent?
Well, again, with the neighbor like Russia, this is a reality with which we live for the past 400 years. We know the threat is there. We know the threat is very high. And the diplomats, together with all the government, with the president, and together with our international partners and allies, especially with the United States, we are working hard in order for the option A, as we say, the diplomatic solution, to be still possible. And we are working very hard to dissuade Russia from making this mistake.
In terms of trying to persuade Russia not to make this mistake, as you put it, trying to prevent war, the Ukrainian government is calling on the U.S. government to impose sanctions now on Russia, while the administration says that they are waiting for sanctions in order to maintain sanctions' deterrent value. Why do you disagree with that?
We are trying to prevent Russia from further aggression and further invasion of Ukraine, and that calls for next level of sanctions, and we're working very closely with our partners and allies here on what these sanctions could be. And yes, Ukraine is advocating that these sanctions should be very strong, and we're very pleased to hear from the administration, from President Biden, that the cost and the sanctions are going to be nothing that Russia ever saw. And yes, there are also grounds for the sanctions to be applied now. So both as the deterrent, the future sanctions, and the sanctions for what Russia already did until it changes its behavior are well supported by Ukraine.
The Ukrainian government has also been asking for more weapons from the U.S. government, anti-ship weapons, surface-to-air weapons, even beyond what the U.S. has been providing this week. Do you think if the U.S. provided more weapons, it would deter Russia?
Absolutely. Last year, the United States military assistance to Ukraine has been the highest since 2014, more than $650 million US. And during the past 3 days, we see on a daily basis how flights are coming in from the United States, delivering their military assistance from the $200 million package that has been authorized by President Biden in December. So again, it's a very much united front that the civilized world is putting together, helping us, because this is not a fight about Ukraine. It's a fight about values and principles. So anyone who treasures freedom and democracy and believes that those values and principles are worth to fight for are standing together with Ukraine these days.
Do you acknowledge that there are weapons the Ukrainian government is requesting that the administration is refusing to provide?
Of course. I mean, if you ask me do we need more javelins or do we need more weapons? Yes, we do. I mean, we are only rebuilding our capabilities after we started building institutions in our country after the Revolution of Dignity in 2014. But I think already we have large progress there, and our American friends and colleagues are the ones who we have to thank for it.
The U.S., as I mentioned before, believes the threat to your government could be existential, including an encirclement of Kyiv and regime change, as the British government said in its intelligence release this weekend. Given the level of threat, are you willing to consider any concessions to Moscow, from more autonomy for the regions under the control of separatists in the east to your future in NATO, in order to try and avoid invasion?
There are principal issues which are very important for Ukraine, as I said, to be independent, to be sovereign, to decide our future by ourselves, to be part of the European Union and NATO, and to be whole again, to restore our territorial integrity. So we are peaceful people. We never planned any offensives and we never attacked anyone. But we are not ready to give up on our sovereignty, on our principal values and beliefs. So, you know, we hope that together with all of our partners and allies, we will send a very clear message to Moscow, and that Moscow will realize that Ukraine does not pose any military threat to Russia. And if they're afraid of us to be successful and democratic, then, you know, they can feel that, but it's not a reason in the 21st century to attack a sovereign country. And no, we are not ready to give up, because we know that when we are given up on something, like it happened in the previous century, the result for Ukraine is devastating. While we were occupied by the Soviet Union, Ukraine suffered from horrible tragedies, from Holodomor, the genocide that has been organized in 1932-1933, which costed us millions of lives. And people were killed only because they were Ukrainians. We went through a series of wars. And so we can only be successful when we are independent and when Ukrainians decide what do we want to do in Ukraine and how do we want to live.
Ambassador Markarova, thank you very much.
Thank you very
All right,
much.
and that's tonight on the News Hour. You're listening to Going Viral News. My name is Jim Dingeman. This is the January 25th edition. We have online with us Ralph Seliger. He's the editor of The Third Narrative, and also I'm joined with my colleagues Mike Jankowitz, Dennis Goldstein, Alex Stavropoulos, and Ken Aaron. Ralph, please unmute, because I'm going to ask you the first question. So give us your opinion of what is going on. What is your take on what's happening with the Ukraine?
Well, you have kind of a coordination of Putin's domestic situation as an increasingly authoritarian ruler whose situation is a little shaky right now. And he's following an age-old playbook of, you got some trouble at home, go look for glory and, kudos by adventures abroad. Of course, Ukraine isn't very far abroad, and he does have some history on his side in terms of Ukraine having for a very long time been the same country as Russia. Putin has some history on his side when he says we're the same country, but they're not the same people. And of course, a nation has to, people in a nation have to have a sense of themselves. They're allowed to have a sense of themselves. Ukrainians, for the most part, do not see themselves as Russian. So there's Putin engaging in foreign adventure, basically to prop himself up at home. Also, he really does believe in, expanding the power and, if possible, the borders of Russia. He has said that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. He really does believe in a bigger country, and Russia's had a pretty hard time in the last, in the post-Soviet years. It hasn't really gained its feet in the same way that other countries have.
All right. Alex, what do you think about all this? Alex, your opinion.
Well, I'd add that, Ukraine government has some of the same, desire to distract from their own internal domestic problems, which people like Anatol Levin have noted. Also, it's hard to know, well, what's the reality, given of the situation, how much is being blown up by, forces within the military-industrial complex and in NATO, especially when I noticed today that apparently a bunch of German and French government officials have been privately saying, well, they don't detect any Russian plan to invade or any signs that the Russians are going to invade the Ukraine. And also the Ukraine's own defense minister says not only does he not expect, the Russians to invade now, but he doesn't expect them to invade the Ukraine after the Olympics in Beijing, which again, some people are saying, on February 20th, like that, the Russians will just come in.
Well, the Chinese, Alex, the Chinese supposedly asked the Russians not to invade during the Olympics, but go on.
So, but again, always in these since 2003 in these kind of situations, I always wonder, how much of this is just the usual lying by the United States for, their own purposes, given how, and wonder again, why should we trust the same people that lied us into Iraq, that lied us into Vietnam, etc.? So I'll stop there.
All right. Well, we're going to deal with the domestic issues after this with a focus on England, which is quite interesting because over the weekend we know that the UK announced that there was a coup plot underway. MI6 announced that, and today I should add the United States press actually yesterday they verified that assertion. But again, who knows what the truth is? And what Alex is referring to was there was a assessment by a think tank in Kyiv, which basically argued, based on the latest military assessments and intelligence, that the Russians were not prepared to attack right now. In fact, if they're going to be prepared, it would be about 2 to 3 weeks out. And there was a whole panoply of indications basically reinforcing that point, which is at variance, of course, with what we're hearing in the press around the world and certainly the United States. But let me bring Michael in. Michael Jankowitz, you come on in this. Mike, what's your assessment of what's going on with this situation right now?
Well, first of all, I think that the United States may have been telling lies to get into wars, but then again, Vladimir Putin isn't exactly the God's gift to truth-telling either. So,
really, go on.
Yeah, I know it's a surprise to a lot of people. And if we examine Putin, and the fact that he's talked about the greatest calamity in recent history has been the collapse of the Soviet Union. Well, the Soviet Union was his comfort zone. Just to remind everybody of the saying from inside Russia, once KGB, always KGB. Well, those were the golden days for him, I guess. I don't think anybody who knew that much about him would think that he was going to adjust to the idea of democracy, of a more open society. and a KGB-free society, that he was, even from the beginning, that he was going to adjust that well. So he's still operating from that kind of mindset. As to whether or not when they're going to invade, people could say, well, it's still 2 or 3 weeks out. Well, as far as I'm concerned, saying it's either going to happen tomorrow, the next day, or 2 or 3 weeks from now, that doesn't improve things that much. If it's going to happen, I don't think the biggest question is a matter of when, except on strategic and tactical military terms. But from the larger picture, it's a matter of if it's going to happen. And again, what is Putin, if he isn't going to invade, or at least a limited invasion, what is he pulling here? What is the purpose of all this? And that's the question.
Right, exactly. And I should add, the pundits are in full rock and roll throttle in Washington, D.C. It's just overwhelming, the amount of panels and discussions going on about this. But Dennis, what is your take? What's your latest assessment of what's happening with this whole situation in the Ukraine?
You got to mute, Dennis.
Yeah, you got to unmute, Dennis. While Dennis is unmuting, oh yes, go on. Yeah, Dennis, what do you think?
I think that the United States is the provocateur, not Putin, and that is the most dangerous military in the world is the United States. It's provocateur. What is it doing surrounding Russia? Why is it using NATO the way it's using NATO? I think that we need an anti-imperialist movement in the streets challenging United States foreign policy. I'll leave it at that.
All right. Well, thank you, Dennis. Kenny, your comments about all this.
Okay. Yeah, I will make a short comment here. Just give me a second. I want to show you this. There we go. I guess that's up there now. I find it's interesting in these political conflicts or these potential conflicts, people always start talking about the principles like it's a Greek play. Putin and Boris Johnson and what's his name? Joe Biden, maybe Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. All of the heads of it. Nobody's mentioned Denzel Washington or James Cagney yet. But if you take a look at a map, these blue countries are all part of NATO. And the red is Russia. And there's the two yellows as at this point not aligned with NATO. And I've heard from a reliable source, Sweden and Finland are considering joining NATO. I don't know about Belarus. So Russia is very concerned. This is what's on the ground. This is the situation on the ground. And right now, I don't know, they got an approval to put another pipeline in here, the Nord Stream pipeline in to get to Germany. And that would cut off lines going through the Ukraine, so they'd lose some income. So there's economics too. But look at the geopolitics here. Putin is Putin, but he's got people. He's got to make sure he doesn't get assassinated. He probably has at least a wife or a mistress and a couple of kids. And he's a person, and there's other people there besides Putin. And there's got to be people running. There's got to be some form of governors and mayors all throughout the country. He's not a unitarian autocrat like Stalin was. So it's a question of all of these countries. What are their concerns? And I don't think, but by the way, my prediction is it won't happen. He will not invade. It's just a push to get the U.S. to agree not to arm Ukraine with weapons that would threaten Russia and to back off on recruiting, make some kind of an agreement with Sweden and Finland. You have to remember, take a look at this map and remember how sensitive we were when Russia was allying with Cuba and sending missiles and military there. Remember our reaction to that? Well, here's their reaction to getting choked off. And, let's take a look at the geopolitics, not the personalities. That's my viewpoint. But I don't think there's going to be a conflict. I think they're just making noise, and some guys in the munitions business wanted an excuse. Did you see the equipment that they were sending over there? You think just one of those missiles would be could keep a family fed and well housed for 2 or 3 years. Just one of those shells, they're like $2 million a piece. And they're going to send them more stuff, send them more stuff, send them more stuff. It's just a sham for to support the military-industrial complex, which, okay, we got to spend money somehow. But the money doesn't get distributed that evenly to the rest of society when it goes into the military-industrial complex. It's much better if it goes into education. It gets distributed much more thoroughly through the bulk of the population than when you just buy, $100 million jet planes. Okay, so I'm done talking. Talk too much there. Just
all right,
think.
well,
look at the countries.
Very valuable to see that, Ralph. Excuse me, Kenny. Ralph, now yesterday we were talking, and one of the things you raised, we were in a forum where people were talking about this very issue, and Ralph raised the question like, well, why do we still have NATO? And I just wanted you to further explicate your thoughts about that, Ralph.
Yeah, thanks. There is this historic dimension that, after the Soviet Union collapsed, it seems that we missed a real opportunity for a peaceful settlement for the future by continuing NATO the way we had, by expanding it in terms of absorbing former, the Baltic states and the former countries that were under Soviet thumb in the Iron Curtain, that were absorbed into NATO. Of course, by their wish, they certainly wanted to, but it was communicating the wrong message to Russia. For a while it was fine. Russia was not into a conflict situation yet. If you recall yesterday, I went down memory lane a little bit. I remember, I don't remember the exact year. I also don't remember the name of the personality, but there was a ambassador or a minister, a Russian authority who was highly respected internationally. I think it was in the very early aughts where he suddenly makes a speech that is very reminiscent of the Soviet era kind of Cold War aggressive kind of speech. And people are totally shocked. And then he goes, wait a minute, just kidding. This is theater. But I have a message here, which is if Russia is not dealt with in a respectful sort of way, if many Russians feel that our interests are not being met, we might in fact revisit a Cold War situation. And he was just sort of saying, NATO should be watching what it's doing. It was a warning that was not heeded, as far as I can tell. I mean, my general orientation toward this situation is sort of a mixture, an odd mixture perhaps, of firmness and appeasement. I do think that Russia, it should be understood that nobody's going to be taking Crimea back from Russia. Crimea was historically Russian, and it's true that Russia violated the international law and international order by taking it by force. That's not a good thing, but I think somehow it needs to be communicated to Putin. Maybe it's sort of an off ramp for him. Look, Crimea is yours. We understand that. I mean, it's interesting. The commander of the German Navy, who is now the ex-commander of the German Navy, made exactly this point, and then he was forced to resign. It's very hard to make that kind of concession internationally. Also, I think Ukraine has to understand that it's not going to take back those two eastern provinces by force. It's not going to work, and the West should not encourage it to do that. Those are the appeasement side. The firmness side is Russia should know that if it in fact does attempt to gain some advantage militarily, and I don't think the 100 to 200,000 troops are there because they don't mean to threaten. I think they are threatening. Doesn't mean that they're going to do a full-on invasion, but they're certainly threatening something. They should understand that the Ukrainians are now well enough armed that it's going to cost them, and it's also going to cost them economically. I'm all in favor of that.
All right, let everybody unmute. Let's all get into this. Let's start off with you, Alex.
Okay.
Jump off and let me just ID what we're doing. We're doing going viral.news. This is the January 25th edition. We're talking about the situation in Ukraine. And one little factoid I want to throw in here is that I was listening to the president of the Potomac Association earlier today, who revealed a very interesting statistic. The bulk of the Russian army has circulated through Donetsk and Luhansk. In other words, they recycled most of the Russian armed forces in the past 7 years. So remember, this has been going on since 2014, the summer of 2014. So this is an exceptional situation. The Russians in December, whether this is accurate or not, remember, everybody is not following the INF treaty, the international, the basically controlled IRBMs. And the Russians announced that they were going to take their nuclear warheads out of storage and put them on their delivery vehicles. All right. And so, but anyway, Alex, your reaction to what Ralph just said.
Well, one way I think Putin may have already won economically is that so there's a good everybody should look up Aaron Made of the Gray Zone. He did a great interview with Professor Richard Sakwa at University of Kent, who's a Russia expert, and Sakwa was pointing out that because that all of this saber rattling has driven up gas prices. So if that was Putin's intent, then he's already won out, because basically that means that the Gazprom is going to clean up and make billions of extra dollars selling their natural gas, whether through Nord Stream 2 or to, China or other countries. So I don't know if maybe that was Putin's plan again, because again, it's basically roiling the commodity futures market, and Obviously, that's also good for like ExxonMobil, so maybe the U.S. likes that too, or something in the energy industry likes that. But I wonder if that's kind of part of his calculation, or maybe it's just a nice ancillary effect that Putin will take advantage of now. It's certainly going to fill his coffers at home, which is always good for a regime.
All right, Mike, what do you think? Michael?
Yeah, I know you didn't mean it that way, Alex, but I don't think it's good for the overwhelming majority of the population that the gas prices go up, except in the realm of getting rid of using gas and going to alternative sources of energy. I think the buffer zone idea is that Ken basically brought up. I mean, Russia, the Soviet Union before it, has always wanted a buffer zone. They've always felt they needed it. After May 1941, their need for it was somewhat justified. They don't like people on their borders who can just roll over and invade the country. However, if we go back, I mean, I remember back when the Soviet Union first fell, and Yeltsin was in charge, and there was this talk about Russia becoming part of NATO. I don't know how far it went. I don't know if it did go that far, which side nixed it, but that means NATO would have been basically just a police force, as it has been in the Balkans, during the period since then. But I don't know what happened there, and or why, we moved back into this Cold War situation. But as far as Ukraine goes, again, and just the same with Crimea. You talk about, well, letting them have Crimea, in other words, saying, okay, that's yours, we're not going to take it back, and okay, the overwhelmingly Russian portion of Ukraine, we're going to let that go. However, what we're ignoring is the people who actually live there, and what they want. Now, in Crimea is something, should in the future Crimea rise up against Russia again and create an internal problem for Russia, are we just, in other words, is the United States or indeed the West just going to sit there and say, sorry, but, sorry, pals, you're on your own. We already told Russia it's theirs. I mean, the calculations that are going on here, the political calculations have some future-oriented aspects as well. So we have to look at that. And the fact is that as far as the economic situation, and the gas pipelines, et cetera, that also is something we also have to be looking at. I don't think Russia, since it would be costly for them and it would be costly to Putin domestically to invade Ukraine, he would probably have massive popular support behind him at the beginning. But again, if it became protracted, he would start losing that massive popular support, pretty much the way the United States lost it in Vietnam, when it started saying, okay, this is costing us too much, maybe we shouldn't be doing this, et cetera, and that could lead to serious problems for Putin. Now, if he assumes more and more the role of a dictator, then he probably couldn't care less what the majority of the population thinks. But I think at this point, he does care. So I think, again, to me, the question still remains, if he isn't going to invade, which would not be a good idea on his part, again, what is he trying to do? Most of the economic gains, et cetera, could have been done in other ways. So why this particular maneuver, if it doesn't have to do directly with confronting Ukraine?
All right. Well, let's throw this up. Now, and you're listening to Going Viral at News. My name is Jim Dingeman. We're talking about the situation in Ukraine. This is a survey of Ukrainian popular opinion taken in mid-December. This is done by the International Institute of Sociology in Kiev. And what you see in here is that this is a assessment of the opinion that they measured in different parts of the country. Now, remember, the western part of the country is predominantly Ukrainian speakers. They're trilingual. They speak Polish, Russian, and Ukrainian, generally in the western part of Ukraine. But what that shows you is 60% of them will resist. In the center, which is essentially around the city of Kiev, 52% of the population will resist. And then in the south, which is around Odessa, 43%. And you can see they make distinctions between armed resistance and civil resistance, boycotts, demonstrations, strikes, etc. And in the eastern part of the country, which is where you get into predominantly Russian-speaking areas, and the closer you get to the border, they predominate, certainly in the Crimea and the Luhansk and Donetsk areas. You'll see that the amount in favor of armed resistance just declines a little bit, but still 37%. So the poll, this was taken in, and they broke it up by parties too, which I found fascinating. So they sort of, as you can see, this Poroshenko's party. Poroshenko, of course, was one of the leaders. He's now been arrested. He returned and he's been arrested. But you see the will to resist throughout the population varies in terms of their support for different political figures. So, for example, Timoshenko, Zelensky, about 50%. And Zelensky's popular opinion ratings have declined somewhat. Remember, Zelensky, when he became president, he named his party after his TV show, which I must admit is quite funny, by the way. Servant of the People I recommend that to everybody. It's sort of funny to watch. But anyway, let me just now get Dennis his comments before we shift to the British situation. Dennis. Dennis? All right, let me go to Kenny. Kenny, your comments before we shift to the British situation. Your last comments on this stuff. You got to unmute, Ken.
Sorry, just falling asleep here. The only other thing I want to point out is, like Russia learned a lesson when they try to control Afghanistan. This isn't going to happen over a weekend, because this is not going to be like World War II, big bombardment and so forth. It's going to be more like Germany taking Poland, street fighting and so forth. There's no Maginot Line. I don't think it's going to be a big battle. They're going to just roll in, take it over, and then be a lot of street fighting. So it's going to be prolonged. And the reason I'm bringing that up, if I can get to it, 1 second. I had it here a second ago. There it is. Okay. Let me just get this up. Go back here, share screen. There it is. Okay, so you see this screen here? So we're looking at Ukraine has got a GDP of $500,000 a year. Well, whatever it is, it's 576,000. This could be millions, I don't know, but it's 576,000. You look at the U.S., 22,6, let's say 22,675,000 compared to 570,000. Okay, just to get a scale, Russia's down here at 4,300,000, and we're at 22. We have money for whatever method of corruption or pretense it is to throw away for all of this military adventure, wasted money, and damage to the. It's over there. It's damage to. Usually, the wars we fought are not here, so the environmental costs are not something we directly have consequence in the States. But this is a war that's going to be on a bordering country with them, and I would say whatever's going to happen, it's going to be a low-scale, ongoing conflict that would drain Russia and give them an extra burden activities that they have to handle. It's not going to gain them any friends. I don't think they have any allies that are, upset with the Ukraine and want to see them have some pain. So it's just going to go, the sympathy of the world is going to be with the Ukraine. And I don't know, I don't read the UN, so I don't know how many people are familiar with that. But what the General Assembly would say on this, I know they always put somebody up there and say, put down your guns, stop fighting, let's have some pudding and tea. No need to get upset. But honestly speaking, the General Assembly will vote towards a faction's intentions to approve or disapprove of the activities of a certain country. And they'll call some countries terrorists, imperialists, and other countries they won't. They'll say this is a wonderful country that stands for the rights of individuals. So I'm just saying Russia would also have go up against a wall of diplomatic opposition. And they would get drained financially. I don't think they're going to find magic mushrooms or what's that stuff that the very fancy mushrooms that cost $20 an ounce. They're not going to find some gold mines in the Ukraine that's going to make them rich. The incremental benefits, even if the Ukraine invited them in, there would be questions about how profitable it is for them to get involved there. But I'm just looking at the scale. We have just like Americans. We have enough money to buy some stuff to put in the closet if there's going to be a food shortage. You can buy extra rolls of toilet paper. But in these poorer countries, and I have to include Russia, Russia's not doing that well. And they only got, and their GDP is low compared to Japan. It's a little bit lower than Japan, and it's about the same as Germany. And but it's nowhere near India and Europe, the European Union, the U.S. and China, the big guy. So I don't think it's going to happen. I just don't see it.
All right.
That's all.
All right. Dennis, do you want to make the last word on this, Dennis? All right. All right. Well, let me shift to...
let's go to England.
Yeah, let's go to England. Now we're just going to liven things up. Before we start this, as we know, there is a controversy in England over the Prime Minister, and we're going to hear, this is the first round of Prime Minister's questions 13 days ago, where this is the head of the opposition, the Labour Party, and you're listening to Going Viral.news, the January 25th edition of it, and you'll get the gist of it. This is his questions directed to Boris Johnson.
Months of deceit and deception, the pathetic spectacle of a man who's run out of road. His defence that he didn't realise he was at a party. It is so ridiculous that it's actually offensive to the British public. He's finally been forced to admit what everyone knew, that when the whole country was locked down, he was hosting boozy parties in Downing Street. Yes. Is he now going to do the decent thing and resign?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is...
Hancock went.
I think somebody will be going for an early cup of tea as well. Can I just say, the question's been asked. I want to know the answer. Your constituents want to know the answer. I don't need any extra help either. So please, Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the point that he's making about the event that I attended. I want to repeat that I thought it was a work event. I regret very much that we did not do things differently that evening, Mr. Speaker, as I've said, and I take responsibility and I apologise, Mr. Speaker. But as for his political point, I don't think that he should preempt the outcome of the inquiry, and he will have a further opportunity, Mr. Speaker, I hope, to question me as soon as possible.
Keir Starmer.
Well, that apology was pretty worthless, wasn't it? Let me tell him why this matters. Yesterday in this chamber, honourable members told heart-wrenching stories about the sacrifices people across the country were making. This House and the whole country were moved by the honourable member for Strangford as he talked about his mother-in-law dying alone. He was following the rules, whilst the Prime Minister was partying in Downing Street. Is the Prime Minister really so contemptuous of the British public that he thinks he can just ride this out?
Mr. Speaker, I heard the testimony of the honourable member opposite, and I echo his sentiments. It was deeply moving. Nobody who heard that could fail to have been moved. And I know that people up and down the country made huge sacrifices throughout this pandemic, Mr. Speaker, and I understand the anger, the rage that they feel at the thought that that people in Downing Street were not following those rules. I regret the way the event I have described was handled. I bitterly regret it and wish that we could have done things differently. And I have and will continue to apologise for what we did. But, Mr. Speaker, he must wait for the inquiry, which will report as soon as possible.
All right. So that was 13 days ago. Now let me go into what happened several days ago. This is also the Prime Minister's questions. The Brits, of course, have a lot more fun than we do in the scalding of their leaders. This is Prime Minister's questions several days ago, a follow-up, if you will, to what happened. This is the lead-off of the Prime Minister's question.
Prime Minister, question one.
Mr. Speaker, I will shortly be updating the House on this country's fantastic progress in tackling COVID-19, including our booster programme, enabling us to ease Plan B measures and restore the ancient liberties of this country. Mr. Speaker, I know that the whole House will be delighted that Her Majesty the Queen has given permission for a special medal to be awarded to all those who deployed to Kabul. Operation Pitting saw our servicemen and women deliver the largest British evacuation since the Second World War. The whole country can be immensely proud of their service. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Wendy Chin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year we were told by the Prime Minister there were no Downing Street parties. Then it turned out there were parties, but we were assured that no rules were broken. Last week we heard that rules may have been broken, but that he thought it was a work event. And now yesterday from the man who wrote the rules, it was, well, nobody told me what those rules were. Mr. Speaker, 5 weeks ago the people of North Shropshire were clear, and the people of North East Fife are being clear to me now. No matter the excuse, there is no excuse for taking the British people for fools. Will the Prime Minister agree it is now time for him to resign?
No, Mr. Speaker, but what I can tell her is that, as I said to the House last week, I apologise sincerely for any misjudgments that were made, but she must contain her impatience, Mr. Speaker, and wait for the inquiry next week before she draws any of the conclusions that she's just asserted.
John Burham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Latest evidence and research shows that the UK is the most attractive country in the world amongst young people across the G20.
Now let's skip through that, guys. It's less fun. The one coming up is Dinger. Here we go.
Mr. Speaker,
here's the leader of the Labour Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by warmly welcoming... Can I start...
Listen to the Prime Minister.
Can I just say, I expect people to listen to the Prime Minister. I certainly don't want the Leader of the Opposition shouted down. You might not like the day, but this is the day that we've got. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not bothered. I assumed it was directed over here. Can I start by warmly welcoming the honourable member for Bury South to his new place and to the Parliamentary Labour Party. Mr. Speaker, like so many people up and down the country, he has concluded that the Prime Minister and the Conservative Party have shown themselves incapable of offering the leadership and government this country deserves, whereas the Labour Party stands ready to provide an alternative government that the country can be proud of. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party has changed, and so has the Conservative Party. He and anyone else who wants to build a new Britain built on decency, security, prosperity and respect is welcome in my Labour Party. Every week, the Prime Minister offers absurd and frankly unbelievable defences to the Downing Street parties, and each week it unravels.
I've been elected the chair. I don't need to be told how to conduct the business. So if somebody wants to do some direction, I'll start directing them out of the chamber. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I see the very noise. I'm sure the Chief Whip has told them to bring their own booze.
All right, so that is the Prime Minister's questions for the past. I'm sure the one coming up will be another doozy. And the question becomes this leak on the weekend that the MI6 reported that the Ukrainians were being faced with a coup d'etat. Now, some in England, of course, argued that what? Let's talk about the domestic weakness of Boris Johnson in relationship to this story. Now, of course, the United States on Monday validated it, but let's get some responses to Mr. Johnson's dilemma. Ralph, you lead off here.
You got to mute him, Ralph.
Yeah, I'm okay here. I'm not sure how to venture on this.
In any way you want.
Well, look, I guess it's fairly obvious that Boris Johnson is trying to make the most he can out of the foreign situation, out of the Ukraine situation, to make his government look good, to make it look strong. Now, of course, I have no idea whether the notion of a coup is true or not. You know, I have no facts about that. And of course, if it is, well, it's a coup on Johnson's behalf, not the actual coup, but it would be a feather in his cap. And of course, he's in a fix right now, and getting some good publicity, good press from dealing with this international situation is certainly in his interest.
Okay, Alex, what do you think?
Well, I think if Keir Starmer wasn't such a complete incompetent leader of the Labour Party, they would already have, kicked Johnson out and might be, have the opportunity for an election where Labour would actually, could win, given how, Johnson has botched everything from Brexit to the COVID response, where, the UK's death toll is almost, well, a little bit better than, say, that of Brazil and the U.S., and certainly up in the running of top 5 worst death tolls per capita in the entire world. But, like Trump, Johnson has a tendency to brazen his way through all these things. So, I mean, he should be out, in my opinion. His own party should kick him out for his, just for its own good and for the good of the country. Again, I like that. I forget which of his one of his backbenchers, conservative MP, actually quoted, I think it's Leo Amory, about Neville Chamberlain, that it was, his time to go.
Time to go. In
1940, which obviously brought Churchill in, and we know what happened there. But,
Yeah, I had sort of the greatest hits lined up, including that one. But anyway, so Kenny, what do you think about this? What, like Kenny and I are used to this. This is like a Pacifica board meeting, what they do. I mean, it's not because that's Pacifica meetings. They carry on like that. But what do you think, Ken?
Oh, I think it's kind of embarrassing that they would degrade down to cancel culture. You blow your nose. You blew your nose into your cuffs instead of pulling out a handkerchief. You crossed your eyes when you looked at me. You put two fingers up in the air. Remove that cad. Take him off. Fire him. It's ridiculous. It's childish. What did he do? It's not a financial thing. It isn't even a sexual thing. It's attending a party without wearing. I have a block to cursing in public media. It's he had a blinking beer when not wearing a mask. Yeah. All of the U.S. politicians and celebrities have been caught doing that, including Nancy Pelosi, Gavin Newsom, what's her name, AOC, the princess. She went down to Florida so she could get drunk and without a mask. So, people do it all the time. Every time I watch a newscast and some politician or somebody is talking to the camera with a goddamn mask on his face. There's a cameraman. You don't have to wear a mask. You're not in a crowded, it's silly. It's just pretentious bullshit. And it's degraded that. I don't know anything about British politics, but that one party has to go with this. Oh, his underwear was showing. I think we can get him on that. He did, or I saw the crack of his rear end. Oh, you know what? There's a great movie. The name of the movie is called Ridicule. And it was about a guy who was trying to get a sewer system built in the province. He had to go to Paris to get the money granted for it. He's an engineer, humanitarian. What my city needs is sewers. And he had to become popular in court. And so he did. He became popular in court by being an irritant, somebody who's critical of others, like a critic. And one of the people coming into court was embarrassed because his socks didn't match, and he committed suicide. And the name of the movie is Ridicule. And ridicule is one of the most powerful weapons to be used in politics. Reference Rules for Radicals, Saul Alinsky. Ridicule is the number one knife you can use to go after your opponent, especially when you don't have anything to offer. There's probably not much difference between the Labours and the Conservatives, the Tories, whatever it's called over there in Britain. I'm one of the few people that I have no amorous appreciation of London. I was there a couple of times. I think it stinks. In fact, my favorite line from the movie Snatch, which is a great movie, Dennis Farina, he's leaving Britain. So the guy in customs says, "You have anything to declare?" He says, "London sucks." That's what he declared. That's funny. So I just think it's embarrassing. You're going to get, you want to eliminate Biden for this, sometimes getting things backwards, his dyslexic speech, or because he, likes to sniff girls' hair. It's a goddamn country. We're trying to run a country with, all kinds of forces fighting each other, trying to get ascendancy, trying to get their program approved. You got, these religious things, political things, economic things. We're facing a monopoly, an autocratic rule of the planet by Google, Facebook, and other companies we don't even know the names of. It's turned into a corporatocracy around the world. Again, the best reference for that is the movie Rollerball. It's unfortunate, but that's the references we have these days in movies. So I'm talking too much. I just find it's misbehavior. And I try to be tolerant of it. Forgive people for their misbehavior and misdeeds, their mistakes. But
all right,
I
so
think
you give
silly.
You give Boris a pass. All right, Dennis, what do you think about all this with Partygate in England and all these roasting them over drinking? What do you think, Dennis Goldstein?
Belching Bert Gate.
I think he might have stepped out, Jim.
Okay, Michael.
There's Dennis.
Go on, Dennis. Dennis, what do you think about all this stuff going on in England?
I think Boris Johnson is a sick joke. He's a second-rate. What do you call it again? Trump. And I wish they would get rid of him if they can. And he is the. I think of him as the face of fascism in England.
All right, Mike, your comments.
Gotta mute Mike.
Hey, you already know, Alex. First of all, I have to say I always enjoy watching the PM's questions.
I know you have a kindred heart for that kind of stuff.
Well, but I really, they never tell you who the writer is, because
right,
this stuff is really great.
Yeah, they beat us by a mile, I gotta say.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. But I have to give a couple of correctors to some of our ignorant Yanks here. Alex, I'll be generous by saying you're rather naive to think that the head of the Labour Party can just kick the Conservative Prime Minister out. That's not how it's done. I don't know of any democracy that works that way, actually. But I think Starmer did a pretty good job with the ridicule aspect on Boris Johnson, and actually he's been doing pretty well for the Labour Party as far as this issue goes. As far as Johnson resigning over this, he's not going to resign over this, over a boozy party. It is just another embarrassment to him. I mean, the guy, you're talking about a guy that did some, riding a bicycle on a tightrope to gain attention at the time of the Olympics, or to take attention away from the Queen. This guy's not going to worry about flack he's going to get for a maskless boozy party. But it's interesting. As far as, and by the way, also I have to say, Ken, I happen to think London's a wonderful city. At least it's got history, and it's a damn sight better than that armpit of California known as Los Angeles. But the thing is,
got your galoshes on?
Yeah, well, that's what I usually do to wade through all the shit in LA.
Yeah, right.
But the thing is that as far as, by the way, the coup attempt or something, no, we don't know. I mean, I wouldn't put it past Putin or Putin's people to try a coup in the Ukraine. But whatever it is, I don't think that's probably a product of the British intelligence, and I don't think Johnson had much to do with it, or did it. Certainly didn't do it just to relieve pressure on him. He certainly has other ways to do that. I think Johnson should go. I mean, this is a ridiculous way. This is like getting, Al Capone on tax evasion.
It worked, though. It worked. It got him in prison.
It worked, and if it works, fine. However, they could get to a situation where they would force him to call an election, unless the government gets so dysfunctional that a Royal Highness has to step in. But if we can get him to call an election, fine. There's plenty of other reasons Johnson should go, but and if this is the only way they can do it, I just can't figure out why they can't use one of the myriad other reasons.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's you, Alex, now take over there. What do you got to show for us today, Alex?
Okay, give me a sec. Let's first go. I don't know if you heard about what happened in Burkina Faso, Jim.
Yes, I have, but you're going to show that piece from Al Jazeera?
Yes.
Okay, so let's see what happened. Burkina Faso, of course, is an amazing place. It is a place where they had the equivalent of Sundance for African films. Sankara, who was the dictator who's long gone, brought that in. But let's hear what Alex has to say with this.
Be sure to click those two buttons for the sound.
Yeah, I did,
Okay,
Ken,
great.
actually. That's why I went out. All right, so this is military coup in Burkina Faso, the west coast of Africa. Again, might be significant. Let's see what Al Jazeera has to say about it.
After days of gunfire, anti-government protesters cheer at the sight of what is left of the presidential motorcade. Burkina Faso's special forces turned their weapons against the president's security detail. Several people were wounded.
What's going on here right now? Nothing's going well. We expected a lot from President Roch, and he's only disappointed people more, with new appointments, always with a new government. But he was the real problem.
For the president's party, this was an attempted assassination on a democratically elected leader. Roch-Marc Kaboré survived, but his time in office was up. A band of soldiers calling themselves the Patriotic Movement for Safeguarding and Restoration, led by this man, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damibé, appeared on state television, saying they had ousted Kaboré, the government, and suspended the constitution.
The movement, which brings together all the components of the defense and security forces, has thus decided to put an end to the power of Mr. Kaboré on the 24th of January 2022, a decision taken with the sole aim of enabling our country to get back on track and to gather all its forces in order to fight for its territorial integrity, its recovery and its sovereignty.
Kaboré faced growing discontent in his inability to deal with the rising attacks of armed groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIL. Millions have been displaced and thousands killed. What appeared to be a mutiny on Sunday, with soldiers asking for more means to deal with the ongoing threats, escalated into a military takeover on Monday, with special forces taking over both the national TV station and the presidential palace. Earlier in a tweet, President Roch-Marc Kaboré asked soldiers to lay down their arms in the interest of the nation, calling for dialogue. The West African body ECOWAS called on the soldiers to return to their barracks, while the EU urged the immediate release of the president. The UN expressed condemnation.
A third coup in West Africa. I will say that ECOWAS, the regional organization, has been extremely responsive and strong in and unified in their responses to these coups.
After Mali, Guinea, now Burkina Faso, soldiers are yet again toppling an unpopular but democratically elected president in the name of the people, promising to restore peace in a region gripped by violence and uncertainty. Nicholas Hawk, Al Jazeera.
So let's look at why Burkina Faso is important, some of its resources. Again, it's notable for its cotton production, sorghum, as well as having quite a bit of copper, zinc, but most importantly, it's the fourth largest gold producer in the world. So those are probably, well, those are economic factors behind perhaps the coup. Or interesting again that Jim, do you know anything about this unit? Are they, do you know if they're French trained, American trained, or anything like that? Because that might tell us something about, why they're doing this. And of course, there's also the general issue, like, well, again, he's unpopular, but he is democratically elected. So what do we think about? Obviously, I guess we should all disapprove of any military coup, regardless of, unless it's truly like a dictatorial leader. And so we should be against this kind of thing regardless. So I guess I'll throw that out there and let other people comment now.
Well, like Jim was recommending an open mic. Alex, why do you say he's unpopular? How do we know that's true?
Well, again, that's partly why the army chose to remove him.
No, that's the excuse they gave.
As Al Jazeera said.
That's an excuse the army gave. Nobody likes him. We're getting rid of him.
Well, again, you saw the people they interviewed on the street saying they were happy to see him go. So I think that's representative.
Yeah. Oh, a poll. That's a poll. That's very efficient.
Well,
it's just, who doesn't like this guy? Come here. What's bothering you about him? I mean, in other words, if you're going to have a coup, you say, well, we got to go in there with a PR team and convince the media that this guy is not well liked, just to set up to make it a little softer. So I'm just saying that, is there anything in there? Was the country like everybody's starving to death?
Oh no,
lead
nothing
pipes?
like that. I don't think. No.
No. So what do you mean they didn't like him? I mean, what was it? What justification?
I'm just saying what I've read in other.
Oh, okay. Well, that's what I would question. That number one. It sounds very much like the plot of a movie, a very good movie with Christopher Walken called, I think it was called Dogs of War. You know, it's this African country and come in.
Right, Frederick Forsyth's novel.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
so
let me, Ralph. Well, we have.
What
got
do you know about that country and that dictator?
Well, it's very interesting. I know a little bit about it, but let me hear it from what some others have to say. Their opinions, their perceptions of this. Ralph, what do you think about all this? Have you been following these events in Africa?
Well, a little bit. From what I've gathered is that this president was elected about a year ago, and probably this is a country that has its problems. I understand that there's a serious Islamist insurgency in part of the country. That supposedly is what's fueling the army's beef, because they're saying they're not getting enough support. So that's the issue that's on the surface, at least. As for the popularity of this president, of course, we don't know, but news sources are telling us that, in fact, this president has lost a great deal of popularity. I mean, it's like a lot of politicians, like a lot of people become public officials, and a year later, people are unhappy. Oh, you haven't really transformed things. I mean, we elected you to do X, Y, and Z. I mean, that's a lot of that's certainly some of the problem that Biden is running into, without any recourse to how policies get done, how things happen. Certainly Biden's agenda could not be passed without congressional approval. And Burkina Faso has whatever it has over there. I assume it has some sort of parliamentary system. It historically it has a great film industry, I understand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
Jim, have you been there?
I have not been there, but this
I
is
think
what I know.
Jim has been to Africa, so I'm just wondering if he's.
This is what I know about it. It does have a very accomplished film industry.
Yeah, he organized. Sankara organized what he wanted to be the equivalent of Cannes Film Festival in Africa. So for a long time, in the capital of Burkina Faso, there was an international film festival that was widely regarded as prestigious and equivalent to, they referred to it as the Cannes of Africa. Now, Kenya and South Africa sort of taking that role. But let me just bring in Dennis. Now, Dennis, like what is, of course, in these Francophone countries, I know in Mali, the army overthrew the government, and then they now have kicked out the French. They've kicked out they ordered over the weekend the Danish peacekeepers that are there because of the United Nations to leave, and they brought in the Russians. So who knows what's going on in all this?
I don't know if you guys can see this. I put this up. The Times has this whole article. They're waving Russian flags in Burkina Faso.
Oh boy!
And they want the Russians to help them out against the military.
Wow, interesting. And they brought in the Wagner group into Mali.
Well, they point out that they like how the the Russians did in the Central African Republic. So they have
that's heavy
this again
stuff.
with the president of the CAR walking around with Russian mercenaries. And so apparently this group is of that overthrew the president is now saying we want the Russians, basically.
Wow, interesting.
So that's interesting for international power politics.
Anyway, Dennis, what do you think? Dennis, what do you think about all this?
I'm an anti-imperialist. I always look for behind the scenes, whether the U.S. or some other country has provoked the situation, and who are the parties that are part of the coup, and who are they siding with internationally? We have to answer those questions. And as far as I'm concerned, we should be striving for independent countries, not countries that are part of one bloc or the other. We're looking for sovereignty. And you have to say, if the country doesn't have sovereignty, then who's pulling the strings? These are all questions that have to be answered.
Yeah, fair questions. Michael, your comments. Mike?
Yeah, well, first of all, as far as them trying to get help from Russia, I think Russia's militarily deployed slightly elsewhere right now. So they're a little preoccupied with something else. So I wouldn't, if I were them, I wouldn't hold their breath. The main thing, the point, the one piece of information that came out in that report that disturbed me the most was one that nobody's been discussing, which is that they suspended the Constitution. With the coup, they suspended the Constitution. Not much good can come if they suspend the Constitution. Now, I don't know exactly what the Constitution of the country was, but the fact is suspending it is a very ominous sign. And if you're talking about fascism or dictatorship, that is a very ominous sign. So I have my skepticism over any legitimacy for the coup once they do something like suspend the Constitution, even temporarily.
Okay. And you're listening to Going Viral News. We're talking about the situation in Burkina Faso. This is the January 25th edition of Going Viral. Alex, what do you have next? What's up next, Alex?
Sorry,
are you there, Alex?
Yeah, sorry, I had to mute. Wait, so let me put it back. So let's go to what's going on. Some very interesting politics in Honduras, which is, well, the creation of two separate parliaments. So this is Telesur. Oh, let me full screen it. Yeah, and explain because this has been going on for about a week. So it's kind of very interesting.
From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Honduras, where members of the National Police Force reiterated their support for constitutional President-elect Xiomara Castro after the institutional crisis sparked in Congress. The National Police issued an official statement recalling that they are a subordinate security body under the authority of the President, elected by popular vote. In accordance with the Honduran Constitution, the police force is a professional and apolitical institution with a purely civilian nature, responsible for the preservation of public order. In this sense, the force expressed its support to the President-elect and called on all other public forces to defend the will of the population as expressed in last November's elections. And we continue in Honduras, where in the midst of a political crisis which led to the election of two new boards of directors of the National Congress, the Council of Private Enterprise has called on the political forces in dispute to seek a solution through dialogue. The Council warned that the credibility of the political elite at a national and international level was deteriorating due to the political crisis stemming from a split in the Liberty and Refoundation Party. It called for unity as the only way for the country to overcome the crisis. The spirit of hope that the Honduran population has experienced since the November 28th election, with the landslide presidential victory of Xiomara Castro, has turned into discontent and repudiation at the acts of certain politicians just a few days before her inauguration as president. All
right, so this is a very interesting political crisis in the newly elected government of Xiomara Castro as prime minister in Honduras. Again, as they said, she won a landslide election, but a split within her own party has led to the declaration of basically two separate parliaments. Several members of, again, her Castro's party joined with essentially the old government in order to declare kind of, essentially one speaker, their version of the speaker, versus, again, the one that Castro's her remaining party members and the rest of the parliament, which is the majority, have. So again, this would be like, again, if the Republicans were to announce, well, we're electing, McCarthy speaker, and then to, 10 miles away from the Capitol were to, declare, oh, they're the real Congress, and then there would be basically two rival Congresses, claiming the legitimacy of of our system of government, and two separate houses running things essentially, Republican and Democrat. So and actually when they elected their new president, which again is the president is the head of a state, as is the case in most parliamentary systems, again, member of Castro's party, there was actually physical brawling in their parliament, literal people punching each other, members of parliament on the floor of their house, essentially. So this is a complete mess, and who knows, again, how this is clearly like up in the air, and it also looks to be an effort by the Honduran oligarchy to maintain their control, despite, again, being voted out. And the former Prime Minister, Juan Orlando Hernandez, he's afraid that he could very well be extradited to the U.S. for drug charges and all that. So that might be part of this, that he's instigating this to make some kind of deal that he would avoid prosecution. But,
wow.
Yeah, so it's a whole gigantic mess.
Wow,
again,
amazing.
And of course, again, Honduras has been where many migrants to the U.S. have come from because of their chaos.
Right.
So this could have implications for our domestic politics. Again, if another wave of migrants is forced to flee Honduras because of political strife there, or civil war even. So this could be very interesting.
Yeah, very good, Alex. Why don't you throw another one up? Let's see what else you got.
Okay. All right. Well, we have what's going on with Assange. Again, we had another stage of his appeal. So let me, I'll play what Consortium News, as usual, has some of the best coverage. So let me put up what the editor of Consortium News, Joe Lauria, has to say about the latest decision that he's going to be allowed to appeal to the UK Supreme Court.
Welcome to CN Live's coverage of the High Court decision in London today.
You have to share, Alex.
Oh, sorry. Oh, dang it. I forgot you kicked me out.
I kick out because when we're done, it gets stale when you leave something.
Right. Yeah, okay, no problem. Okay, I'll start it again.
Welcome to CN Live's coverage of the High Court decision in London today to allow Julian Assange to appeal his case, the High Court's case, to the UK Supreme Court. I'm Joe Lauria, Editor-in-Chief of Consortium News. Thanks for joining us. The High Court met and in about a 1-minute statement said, in essence, that Assange could appeal the decision that the High Court made in December to overturn the lower court's decision. That was the district court, Vanessa Barreza. Barreza had decided in January of 2021 that Assange could not be extradited because of his mental condition, his strong tendency to suicide, and the conditions of U.S. prisons. Those two combined to allow her to say that it would be oppressive to send Assange to the United States. The United States then appealed that decision, and in December last month, the High Court overturned Barreza's decision and said the U.S. could extradite him, that Britain rather could extradite him to the U.S. Assange's team then applied to the High Court for permission to appeal that decision of the High Court to the UK Supreme Court. And today we had that decision by the High Court. They said that they would not allow the appeal. However, on one point of law, they would leave it up to the Supreme Court to decide. Therefore, they, in essence, did allow Assange to appeal. It's important to understand that even if the High Court had completely shut down the possibility of an Assange appeal to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court rules are that even if the High Court denies this request for appeal, the Assange could have, in writing, asked the Supreme Court directly to hear his case. In fact, that's what he's going to do. He has 14 days to appeal to the Supreme Court. The issue today was about the assurances that the United States gave to Britain after Barreza's decision. This is key. This is key to this entire story right now. The United States gave assurances to the High Court that they would not put Julian Assange in the most strict regime of incarceration in the United States, so-called special administrative measures, and that he would be provided with adequate health care and both mental and psychological. Based on that he would get the health care and that he wouldn't be put in this particular regime of incarceration, the High Court decided that they would overturn Barreza's decision, which had been not to extradite Assange, and allowing Assange now to be extradited. In fact, the High Court did not contest the substance of Barreza's decision at all in terms of Assange's mental health and the condition of American prisons. I don't think any court in the world with a straight face could argue that American prisons are not extremely harsh. And they couldn't really challenge the medical evidence of the defense put up that Barreza accepted, that Assange was in this depressive and suicidal state. So the court did not say that the prisons are good and that he's a malingerer, as the U.S. had tried to portray him as during the extradition hearing. They accepted all that, but what they did do is accept these U.S. assurances that he wouldn't go to that into SAMS and that he'd get the proper health care. Now, what the defense lawyers of Assange argued during the High Court hearing was that these assurances came after Barreza had made her decision, and that therefore this was new evidence, and that they should have, by law, have been put before Barreza during the extradition hearing, so that the defense could argue against them, bring up evidence from past cases to show that, in fact, U.S. assurances have not been reliable at all. The defense never had that chance because they didn't know that these assurances were coming. Barreza didn't know they were coming. The Americans argued that there was legal precedent for giving assurances at any point during a legal process, that they could give them after the extradition hearing court, the lower court, decided, and give it to the High Court. Now, the High Court in December agreed with the Americans. What they said today was that we certify, I'm quoting from the court now, a single point of law. In what circumstances can an appellate court receive assurances from a requesting state which were not before the court of first instance in extradition proceedings? So while the High Court sided with the United States in December in that they could give these assurances anytime they want, they gave an opening to Assange today to say that the Supreme Court should look at this issue of when the assurances should be given. And this is key, because what the Supreme Court, if they accept Assange's appeal, I believe they will, if for no reason other than that Britain wants to be able to show the world that they are giving him due process, they're going through all the motions. If the court takes Assange's appeal now, they will have to decide the question of when these assurances need to be given. During the extradition hearing in the lower court, or can they be given after that decision was made and to the High Court, which is what the High Court decided. This is important because politically it would seem very difficult for the UK Supreme Court to say we don't believe the American assurances. So the issue of the believability, the credibility, the reliability of American assurance is not going to be at issue at the Supreme Court. What's only at issue is when these assurances should have been filed. During the extradition hearing in the lower court or afterward. And this could be a very important decision of the Supreme Court because they could set precedent on this issue. In the arguments that were made in the High Court, it appears that there's not really settled law necessarily on this issue. Both the defense and the U.S. argued cases that showed that the assurances could be given at any point, even to the High Court, even after a decision. Now, the High Court at the moment is out of the way, and that's pretty good for Julian Assange because this provides Assange a ray of hope, which seemed his case had become hopeless after the High Court decided in December he should be extradited, rejecting Barrett's decision. There is this hope now that the Supreme Court, which does not have to decide whether the assurances are credible or not, but only when they should be given, could provide an opening for Julian Assange. He could also, as I say, provide a precedent about when these assurances have to be given in future extradition cases. Now, the High Court.
Okay, so again, obviously it goes on a bit, but again, the important thing is that this could be a way, essentially, for the British to kind of unload the whole Assange case again, to use this procedural matter to essentially say, well, we're kind of going to let him go, but it won't look like we're caving into the Americans. You know, it won't look like we're basically lackeys to the U.S. empire. And so they can get rid of the whole, you know, the politics around it. Because again, you know, the support for Assange, including in the UK, has just grown because of the, and then the whole issues of, you know, First Amendment here in the U.S. will never come up. This could be a way. Obviously, you know, he's probably not going to be in Assange in any health situation where he's going to be like jumping out and, you know, going back to WikiLeaks and leaking stuff. So they may think, oh, we've neutralized him essentially, but we can avoid, you know, we don't have to actually kill the guy, you know, force him into suicide or, you know, have COVID kill him. So we can just get rid of this whole case. We'll lose the political flack for it. And, but still, he won't be doing much for a long time. Because again, he has essentially been been tortured for the past, decade. Whether it's being, you know, imagine how we would be being confined in just a small residence for a whole decade, then literally in a prison where you can only, you know, you're driven crazy by being, you know, only at 23 hours a day in your cell and so on. So again, and of course, there are still the whole, you know, political prisoner issue of him as a political prisoner, the First Amendment issues, the issues about the right to free speech and so on that they could have kind of offload essentially. But, you know, again, then there's the other point of view that they really do want to kill him because he's so humiliated them over the last, you know, decade or so by exposing war crimes, etc. So Ken, I'm sure you've been seeing as we've discussed this. So I'm sure you have some thoughts here.
Well, it's very I'm unmuted. Yeah, it's very reminiscent of Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah,
it's, you know, quiet, skating offshore, do this, do that, stall it, keep them in jail, make a deal with you know, let them stay in an embassy, just whatever they can do. And they you know, bribed some Swedish girl to get charges. If we get them on this, we can get them on that. So it's just CIA oppression. But that, you know, I think Snowden was good on this because he had an escape plan. He wasn't ignorant. I guess he took some knowledge from what happened to.
And Assange helped him escape from Hong Kong.
Right. There you go. But I mean, at least he got out. You know,
now, smart again going to Hong Kong because again, it being under Chinese control, the Americans couldn't get to him essentially, and he was able to travel onwards to Russia. That was trying to go on elsewhere, but they yanked his passport so he couldn't leave Moscow essentially.
Right. So, you know, there's now, just like in any marriage or business, there's always two sides to a story. So I don't know. I've never heard a really good argument why Barack Obama, even Trump, had this gorgeous opportunity for Trump. I thought Trump was going to pardon him because it'd be totally unpredictable. That'd be the craziest thing he could do. It'd be like if he married Whoopi Goldberg or something.
Yeah,
I mean, it would be like, what? You know,
Tucker Carlson was telling him to pardon, and Marjorie Taylor Greene has been saying something about.
Well, Assange was very helpful to Trump in terms of his election. So
on that too. Oh, that's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was working on the Hillary's email.
Right. Yeah. Again, the crime of telling the truth about Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of the reasons that Trump was elected, but you know.
Yeah.
Well, again, Ralph, don't we have a right to information about our candidates?
Well, I could have done.
She rigged the primary.
It was not a big revelation to me that the Democratic National Committee preferred Hillary to Bernie.
Yeah.
But you know, it shocked all these Bernie delegates and all these Bernie supporters. So they went and voted for Jill, and they voted for Johnson, and they stayed home. And so we had 4 years of Trump. That's great, right?
Yeah.
We're all very happy because of that.
Well, you could have every single Jill Stein voter vote for Hillary. She still would have lost. I mean, so, yeah.
Yeah, but you know, that goes back and forth about elections. I'm just saying it's like the man in the iron mask. That's what it's like. Sorry, given these films.
That's quite a reference.
No, Assange.
It is, you know, the man in the iron mask.
Assange's situation as a human being, of course, is, you know, it's a bad situation for him. I mean, that's for sure. You know, you have to be sympathetic to him as a human being. I'm not sympathetic to him politically.
That's rare to make a statement like that on this channel. Why not?
Ralph, you don't think he did it? He did actually.
You didn't know. Wait a minute. Let Ralph answer. Did he serve the country and humanity or not?
No,
he's not an American, Ken.
Absolutely not. You know, in helping Trump get elected like he did.
Oh.
Okay. I think. Well, look. I've made myself plain. I mean, I don't sympathize with the guy politically. I can certainly sympathize with him as a human being.
No, but I mean in terms
of about him, but him exposing war crimes and the crimes of the United States and other countries around the world, that doesn't give him some credit. You don't want to see that, Ralph?
Okay, Alex, let him answer.
I'm not sure of the war crimes that he actually revealed. I'm not an expert on this guy, you know, but you're prepared to believe that the U.S. Is the bad guy in the world.
Oh yeah.
You know, so you know, we don't have. I mean, you know what your position is. You know, I don't see it that way.
Okay, good. So there's a question about whether or not his efforts.
Well, let Mike jump into this. Mike, do you see the U.S. as a power of good in the world or not? What do you think, Mike?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
I agree with that.
Now, I just want to say one thing again, Alex. Your naivety is coming through, because when you said, just imagine, you know, being confined to a cell with only 1 hour outside. I got to remind you that there's a lot of people incarcerated in this country in particular, most of them minorities, who have to go through that, and they don't go crazy. That's a very, the attitude you're taking is a very, shall we say, upper middle class attitude towards it. But whether or not Assange had a propensity towards mental instability prior to that would definitely be a factor. Now, I don't think, I have to say, I agree with Ralph, which is that I don't think, because you could also talk about Assange's timing in when he released this. And the fact that it was very helpful to Trump. It was helpful in getting Trump elected. I mean, I hope, Alex, you're not saying that we were better off with Trump than we would have been with Hillary. Not that Hillary was God's gift to anybody, or would have been. I mean, Trump was far more of a disaster. And he did Assange's, in other words, as far as revealing the truth, revealing the truth is also a matter of timing. And that's where it can become much more subjective. So his timing in revealing the truth and how he did it, I think was disastrous and not in the interest of humanity. But the fact is, I mean, if he would have just released the information, I'm sure he had some inkling as to what was going on beforehand, and said that before Hillary even, tried to get the nomination. That would have been something else. No, I think he allowed, and he, not only that, maybe he unwittingly, it was unwitting on his part, but he did allow himself to be used by Trump's people. So no, I have no sympathy for him on that one. As far as his incarceration or what they're going to do with him, first of all, I think, Alex, your interpretation of the news is also a little bit, shall we say, biased, because we don't know. I mean, in other words, the British High Court will hear the appeal. Now, the appeal is based on a limited set of factors there, which is the fact of primarily the fact that the United States changed their tune before the Assange's lawyers could have a chance to question it. I am certainly skeptical about the promises made by the United States as to how they'll treat him, but the fact of the matter is there is the possibility that the British High Court will act in terms of justice. There's always that possibility. I should say probably a greater possibility with the British High Court and with a lot of American high courts, including the highest court in the United States right now. So we have to entertain that factor also. But as far as what should happen, I'm compassionate to Assange as a human being. I think there is something called excessive retribution, excessive punishment. And I don't know, I mean, the United States has been guilty of that in the past, and they may well be guilty of that in this case also. But I'd like to see what happens with the appeal to the British High Court.
Thanks. Hey, Jim or Art, Alex, you want
or Dennis? We haven't heard from Dennis.
Dennis, you got a comment about Julian Assange? Come on, Dennis, unmute.
Unmute, yeah.
Not yet. There we go.
I think that Julian Assange is a hero. And I think that he exposed crimes against humanity by U.S. imperialism. And he should be rewarded as a hero for the people. That's what I think. And I don't have any sympathy for U.S. demands in this respect.
Okay. Good. Got it. All right, Alex, you have another piece, or Jim?
Let me see.
Do you or not?
No, actually, you tapped out my last one.
Okay.
I was interested in the news sources you used. I mean, was the Honduran story? Did I?
That's Telesur. Right? That's there. It's a joint station of Cuba, Venezuela, and I think Bolivia again. That does basically obviously kind of presents somewhat their government's view, but it's an alternative, does some very good reporting. Again, it will tell you a lot of the things that basically Western media will never say about what's really going on in Latin America, and gives a socialist point of view, which I generally agree with. And there are plenty of stories that we do not get to hear on CNN about, against the AP is covering, and obviously other alternative outlets like say Al Jazeera have mentioned this whole crisis in Honduras, but most other countries, again, sort of like the big networks, CNN and so on, even the BBC haven't done too much coverage of it. Because it's basically about a leftist government taking over, in a Latin American country.
Well, I think that's part of it. I think that's part of it, Alex. I also think, though, there's a wider structural problem in the retreat of news in the United States from covering international events. I mean, it's just been going on since the 1980s and accelerated ever since. So, yes, I agree that it's useful to look at Telesur the same way we look at the mainstream media and the other news sources we use for this show, which are essentially state-run entities around the world. So they all have their biases. But I wanted to shift a second because Kenny, do you have some stories you want to talk about?
Yeah, I have too.
All right, let me just raise something to get the opinion of people. This is a local story, and we had the situation in Harlem where those three officers came and they were confronted. They were entering a domestic dispute situation on 135th Street. That's a hub. That's a hub in Manhattan, as people know. I've walked the streets where this woman lived, and they came in, as we know, and the guy and the son was there with a Glock that was legally bought in Michigan, illegally acquired in Maryland, and it had a drum magazine on it, and he just let loose, and the second officer died. Now we also have the situation of the woman.
Just to interrupt, two of the three officers are dead.
Yeah, 2 of the 3 officers are dead. The officer
and the
died
third
tonight.
one's in the hospital.
Third one's in the hospital, and he's the guy who shot and killed the other guy. And then you have the other incident confronting Adams as mayor, and almost immediately, where that Asian American woman was pushed and killed in the subway. So, Ralph, I wanted to, and we're all here in New York. I mean, Kenny, while he is in Los Angeles, his heart remains in New York. So I just wanted to hear, Ralph, what you thought about this. What do you think about all these stories going on? What's your perception of them? Because you see around the country, I know Kenny lives in Los Angeles, the homeless crisis there. Remember this just happened? This young woman was killed in a boutique a few days ago.
Yeah.
Some guy knifed her. So what do you make? I'm just curious, Ralph, your thoughts about these kind of stories and what they mean and what you think about it.
Well, I think, it's disturbing. We've had this upsurge of violent crimes, but, as some calm voices have reasoned, the level of violent crime that has increased, it doesn't approach anything like what we had in the 70s, 80s, and into the early 90s. Now, I heard Richie Torres a few days ago, a member of Congress from the Bronx, was making the point that in 1990, the murder rate in New York City, or the number of murders, was something like 2,200. And last year's rate, if I remember what he was saying correctly, was under 500. And it's a jump, it's a significant jump. I think we were around 200 in our best years in New York. And I know people who are very upset with this. They're very worried about the crime rate, and I also know some people who are very nervous about being on subway platforms. And I make a point of staying way back from the track, and I am very aware of who's around me. But I don't have, I try not to go into a panic over this. I do use public transportation. But I could see, as a male, as a guy, I probably feel more confident than many women do. Most of the concerns and worries I hear are from women.
Yeah. Alex, what do you think? What do you think about all this, Alex? I mean, because again, the decay of the city, the themes of this, the issue of the decline of capitalism, and as all these things get interrupted, and then of course, when I see somebody who decides to push a woman into the subway, and then somebody says, I've listened to some of the responses of some of my colleagues on this. I was listening to a show where they basically were talking about, well, we need social workers. Well, who the hell's going to call a social worker up in a situation where some guy just pushed somebody in front of the subway and killed them? I mean, it's just that's the part of that response I must admit I find ludicrous. But anyway, your comments about this stuff.
Right. Well, again, I've always been a kind of rather, again, being in Stuyvesant town, rather relatively sheltered from some of these, crime issues. Again, we have our own little private security here. So, although I can remember not me, but my brother getting mugged on the edge of Stuytown one time, back in the 80s. But, nothing more serious. Yeah, so I know. I mean, again, I am cognizant of the historical issues of who gets criminalized in New York and the overreact fact that, the NYPD is not always the best group that we want dealing with, those kind of mental health cases in all situations. But obviously, yeah, I mean, somebody pushes somebody onto the tracks, there needs to be, they need to be confined, either a mental institution or, to go be sent to jail for killing someone. It's, but then is the question of what to do in general in those kinds of cases and what can we do to, I mean, and then I go back to thinking about, well, in some ways, weren't we better when we did confine a lot of those kinds of people into, before, I guess it was before Reagan let them all out, because of the legal shift that happened. Actually, really after, was it Geraldo Rivera?
Yeah, Geraldo
had that big
Rivera.
expose of
Staten Island
hospitals.
mental hospitals, right? Dennis, your comments about all this stuff, about the street crime, how do you react to these stories? What do you think about them?
The decline of capitalism. We have everything is part of the structural crisis of the capital system. The capitalism is, however long it takes to go out of business, is declining, and we're in a structural crisis now. Either socialism is going to catch up with us, and the people are going to be mobilized to be revolutionaries, or we're just going to fade away. And the longer it takes for capitalism to go away, the longer it is, the worse the scenario for global warming. That's what I say. So we need socialism to end global warming.
Yeah, the global warming issue. Yeah, Kenny, your comments about all this stuff? Because, I know the case in California of that girl getting knifed got international coverage. But what do you think about all these street crime issues and all that?
Okay, well, did you see this thing I just put up?
No.
New York City, it's not there?
Yeah, we can see it, Kenny, yeah.
Okay, great. So Ralph was correct. In the 90s, it was high. It's been a decline in all aspects of crime from the 90s to the 20s to the 2020s and so forth. It's been going downhill like a steep grade. You couldn't even do that on a ski slope if you were a beginner. It was a really steep decline. And this is way after Reagan and way after, uber capitalism hit. So personally, but there has been an uptick, as you can see here. The blue is 2020 and the red is 2019. So there's been a significant increase in murder, not in other crimes, but in murder in New York City. And the thing is, the numbers, even so, are very small.
Yeah.
It's one person out of 10,000 who commits a crime. It's not everybody's running around like in a crazy movie, The Purge or something. But carjackings have increased in major cities, mostly in major cities like New York, Detroit, Philadelphia, because it's very difficult. Plus what they call follow home. You follow a guy home and you get him as he's getting out of the car at his house because he's no longer in public. He drove home in a suburban area, whatever. So it's very difficult. Or as he's going into the house, you push him into a home invasion. Now, again, it's the press is always looking for a story like that. It's got legs. It's going to go. It leads because it bleeds. But what's really happening, or I would make this prediction, unless you stop these incidental items from happening, people being pushed in front of trains or hit in the back of the head for no reason with a bat, or what they used to call the knockout game, we can't talk about it, or the flash mobs, or the homeless people living all over everywhere right in your face. What'll happen is there will be a migration away from those places. I have friends who lived in downtown LA, and they were very liberal and hip, living in an apartment house and so forth. And they said, we just couldn't take it. Too many times, people shitting in the street right in front of them. I can't raise my kid here. You will get an irritation to that imposition on society of derelicts. I'm going to use that word. And people will leave. And they go into Texas. They leave LA. Oh, you got to raise the taxes to handle all the homeless. I'm going to go to Houston or Texas or Dallas or Houston or Galveston or wherever. Or they'll go to the suburbs here. They're not going to have homeless people living in Calabasas, at least not on the regular streets. They could be camping in the park, in the Malibu State Park or something, but not next to the post office, in the movie theater, in a shopping center, where you live, where you don't want to see that. We're not in New Delhi, India. We're not in Bangalore. We don't have super rich and poverty. We just don't want to have it. So unless it's accommodated one way or another, that's what will happen. There'll be a resurgence of segregation where people, not by color, but by income and competence and functionality, will leave from that degradation. And it's mostly drugs. It's mostly drugs and alcohol. And just walk by the tents and see what the activity is. It's mostly drugs and alcohol. Take a look at the criminals who are getting arrested. Look at their records. Look at everybody. All of the people involved, the majority of the people involved in the judicial system, one way or another, high percentage, drugs and alcohol. Now, I like getting drunk. I've used most of the drugs that are available too. But it's a question of judgment, and lucky. Therefore, the grace of God, there go I. I could have been in jail too, from the first time I stole something when I was 8 years old, maybe 8. It could happen. You steal a pencil, you could go to jail for life and wind up in prison, and your life could be ruined, or you get a DUI. It happens. And if you're a little guy, if you're the president, you can get out of it, or they give you a golden parachute. They make you resign. But it is drugs. It's a drug thing, and we have in the middle of the middle of the country an epidemic, an opioid epidemic, more people dying from opioids than almost heart conditions or cancer if you isolate it to these central states. So we have drug problems and gangs, and it's not topical now. They don't talk about gangs. 40,000 gang members in LA. 40,000. Nobody talks about it. It's not of interest to the media. And the gangs are essentially Latino and black. There's very few white racist gangs. There's a small contingent of Asian gangs. It's mostly Latino and black. That's the way it is. It's probably like that in every country. You know, that the poor people are going to form a gang and do whatever they can to get sustenance. So I think it's a major problem. But the only thing is, I realized just having us yak, yak, yak isn't that exciting. So I'll make a prediction. This will lead to segregation. People will separate themselves from the chaos and say, I want to live in Calabasas, where I can go walking down the streets and get an ice cream and say hello to everybody and not have to watch behind my back.
Well, they've been doing that for decades. Mike, your comments about this issue, about crime?
Yeah. First of all, you could say it's mainly due to drugs or gangs or something like that. And it's mainly African-American or Hispanic people, as opposed to the, middle class and even upper middle class white people in Texas or down south that go around shooting anybody who's black or Hispanic who happens to work into their neighborhood and claim self-defense. No, you could say, you could attribute it to, it's the minorities on the gangs, or it's, the drug culture or something. But let's face it, a lot of Americans are just fucking nuts. Okay. We have a real mental illness problem in this country. And also a problem with the way we look at things, which is that people think they really, really care about their own life and their own lives, but other people's lives don't matter. And this comes down to a lack of basic empathy. Where you don't, they look at
what percentage are you talking about? Does it include you? Are you one of those people?
No. When I'm talking about mental illness,
who are you talking about? What people are you talking about that are crazy? Who is crazy?
Well, you for one.
Well, okay. But I've learned to use it to my benefit.
Just think about it. If there were a bunch of Ken Aarons running around the country, really being a shithouse. But the fact is that, no, I just think that, people, we have this, self-indulgent, we've got this gun culture, this self-indulgence. Again, we take human life, we value human life as long as it's our own. But other people, we don't seem to care. I mean, it's almost like, hey, yeah, I can kill somebody else. Just as long as nobody has that attitude towards me. Now, when you get into inner cities, you're getting into a more densely populated situation. And yes, after the Second World War, all these guys that came out of the Second World War that grew up in the inner cities, in the slums, et cetera, they said, hey, through the GI Bill, I can get out, I can get a place in the suburbs where it is safer. It is safer to a certain degree because there's the lack of density. But the fact is, we've always had this problem. I mean, this is, if you just look at the racist history of this country, this is kind of a sick country. Dr. King was right. There's a lot of sickness in this country. And, we can think of ways to get out of it. I agree. Putting a social worker on a subway platform isn't going to do squat. But the fact of the matter is, it's something we gotta change in the way we, raise our kids.
The social worker will get thrown onto the tracks. The key issue is don't accuse the victim, the person who got thrown. You're accusing the victim. You're accusing the person who cares about his own life, and he gets thrown on the train track by somebody.
Ken. What? I don't want to accuse you of being an idiot, but
what are you talking
about what I'm saying? I don't even think you're understanding what I'm saying.
You say there's a lot of crazy people here.
There's a lot of crazy people, not the ones being thrown out of the track, you idiot.
No.
I'm talking about the guy throwing people onto the track.
Right.
People are willing to take somebody else's life.
Very small part of the population. Very
Right.
small.
Well, very small.
2% at the most. 2% at the most. Let's get Ralph.
The subway track incident, that's mental illness. That's really mental illness.
Absolutely.
You know, that's somebody who's psychotic. We do have an epidemic of gun violence. We have an epidemic of guns, and I don't know how we get off of that. You know, Australia was able to do it. You know, there was this massacre in Tasmania, I don't know, 20 years ago or something. And, you know, the Australian government said, that's it. You know, they didn't have as many guns as we have. I mean, even proportionate to their population. But somehow, you know, people were sensible enough to say, yeah, maybe we'd be a lot safer if there were many fewer guns. So that's a problem. Now, a social worker on the subway platform, you're right, that probably wouldn't do it. But I do wish a lot of domestic crises had social workers that responded to them. Now, but it's a dangerous situation. You know, there's no guarantee to the social worker, of course. I don't know, that guy who killed the two cops and wound up getting killed himself, was it the fact that there were cops who were intervening that got him to get violent? Would he maybe not have gotten violent with a social worker who was not in uniform? I don't know.
Well, let me ask you a question.
This guy had a Tommy gun
ahead of time. If you knew ahead of time the guy was possibly like that, would you want to be that social worker?
No, that's for sure not.
Yeah, I think that the social work, you know, having social workers show up, there are certain instances, sometimes that may work, but there are certain instances where it's not going to work.
No, it's complete bullshit. I mean, you know, I mean, really, it really is. I mean, I would go down to the Occupy City Hall folks, and they were, you know, the whole operation down there was defund the police. Now, there were gradations of how they acted. And when they got the city council to knock out $1 billion off the New York Police Department budget officially, although I believe it crept back up $500 million, then most of the people left. Now, the people that were left there, the people that the cops evicted, now those were the hardcore abolitionists, defund the police people. And they were very interesting to talk about because they would argue, well, we don't need a police force. I said, well, wait a second, like, what are you going to do in these kind of situations? And they felt that, well, that was reflective of an inequitable society. I said, okay, I agree with that. But nevertheless, what am I supposed to do? Like, have somebody stick a shiv up into me and then, like, you know, be waiting because the society's inequitable? I mean, that's ridiculous. So, you know, and then the other thing about this domestic violence stuff, that is the incident where the most cops get killed statistically around the country. Situations like this, I mean, you know, it's not necessarily a husband and wife squabbling, but it was a mother and a son squabbling. I mean, who knows? The guy had a Glock set up to be an automatic weapon when they came walking in the house. So I don't know, with the police department, you know, as someone said to me over the weekend, two black friends of mine were talking and they said, Jim, I'm afraid that Adams is going to bring back the stop and frisk type of policy, because watch how that will. And I wonder if he will, because look at what his role was when he was a cop, when he was a captain.
I mean, Jim, he was already bringing back the anti-gun unit. I think he's already.
Yes, definitely. I mean, the question is, can he direct this unit in a way that would be different than it's behaved in the past? I mean, one thing that's happened with the police, certainly in New York, I'm not sure what it's like in LA or some other places. Probably a majority of the NYPD now are people of color. There's still a police culture. Two of the cops with Chauvin, in Minneapolis or St. Paul, wherever that was, were people of color, that they went along with Chauvin, who was their leader, as it were. There could be a change in how police orient toward the community. I mean, we have to hope for that, and we have to hope for policies that work in that direction. And I think Adams is the kind of guy who might figure something out. I think we have to give him the benefit of the doubt and, hope for the best there.
Yeah. Kenny, why don't you pick one story and we'll call it a day? So, Kenny, you got a story?
I absolutely agree with Ralph. I have high hopes for him, mostly because he was a candidate elected to be mayor who was a borough president. So he's not a movie star or a politician so much. He was a borough president. He had to do some work. And he seems to be fairly level-headed. And there's another thing. There's a very positive thing happened. The circumstances of life presented him with a shit dinner, and he didn't walk away from it. He came up to the public and said, "This is terrible. We're going to handle it." It's not his fault. It's been going on before he got there, but he didn't walk away from it and say, "Oh, don't blame me. It's Trump's fault." He said, "I'm going to deal with this. We're all going to deal with this." So that's a very positive thing. I'll skip on my thing. It's
all right. And I should say that he's somebody who I've met several times.
He's a real person.
The thing is, the way he runs Borough Hall, he ran it like a dictator, as opposed to the previous person in there. He was very much a control freak.
Was he effective?
I don't know. I don't know if he's effective. I mean, I think he's a very shrewd, like a Tammany Hall politician in New York. I personally think, like we haven't had Jeffrey Gold on for a while. This was the person who despised Governor Cuomo. But his prediction with Adams is that within 2 years, there are going to be people indicted in his administration, because if you recall, one of his colleagues out there in Brooklyn was a guy who was indicted. There was some panky. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, you've been listening to Going Viral and Going Viral.news. This is the January 25th edition. We had on with us tonight Ken Aaron in California, Dennis Goldstein, myself, and Alex Stavropoulos, and Michael Jankowitz in New York. And, of course, we were joined with Ralph Seliger. Thank you, Ralph, editor of Third Narrative. And we want to thank you and stay tuned and good night.